I raised you with my blood, sweat, and love, Jason. And this is how you repay me. You called me a burden, and now you're sending me away like I don't matter at all. It happened so quickly, I almost didn't see it coming. One moment, I was in my kitchen, chopping vegetables, just another day like the countless ones before it. And then, out of nowhere, the world spun, and my legs couldn't hold me anymore. I collapsed to the cold floor, unable to catch my breath. My knees gave out, and I felt a sharp, icy panic grip my chest. Was this the end? Was I dying? I didn't know. All I knew was that in that moment, I was completely alone. Then Jason rushed in. My son, the boy I had carried for 9 months, the child I had raised with hands calloused from hard work and a heart that had bled for him every day. "Mama, are you okay?" His voice cracked, but I heard it, the rehearsed concern, the words that didn't feel real. He had already made up his mind about me. He helped me up, his trembling hands barely strong enough to hold me. But it wasn't care I felt, it was fear. Fear of what he couldn't control anymore. The pity in his touch was unbearable, and for the first time I realized he wasn't looking at me like his mother. He was looking at me like I was a burden. And Danielle, standing there silently, nodded in agreement with him. "You're getting older, Mama," she said in that smooth, practiced voice. "You're not the woman you used to be." I didn't need to hear anything else. I knew what was coming. I was no longer the mother he needed. I was no longer someone to be cherished. I was just something to get rid of. "Jason," I whispered, forcing the words out through the lump in my throat, "you think I'm too much trouble now?" Without hesitation, without a second thought, he nodded. "We've already spoken to a lawyer, Mama. It's time for you to go to a place where you'll be looked after." His words hit me like a slap. This was it, the moment I became invisible to the son I had given everything for. They were ready to send me away, to erase me. But in that moment, as the weight of their betrayal sank in, I knew one thing. I wasn't going anywhere. I wasn't finished. I remember the day they left me at that place like it was yesterday. They promised it would only be for a little while. "Mama, you need to rest. You need to take care of yourself," Jason said. And Danielle, standing beside him with that cold, rehearsed smile, nodded as if she was in on some secret. I could see through them. They weren't trying to help me. They were trying to get rid of me. They took me to that place, cold, sterile, with walls the color of death, and the smell of disinfectant so strong it made my stomach churn. Jason's face was tight, his eyes filled with something that wasn't love, while Danielle's gaze was distant, as if she was already gone. They said it was just a few days, that it would be good for me to be looked after, but it didn't feel right. It didn't feel like help. It felt like abandonment. They left without so much as a hug, no kiss on my cheek, no "I love you," just a cold, final goodbye. A promise that I would be fine, and then they were gone. The door clicked shut behind them, and I was left standing in a room that wasn't mine, with walls that didn't know me and a bed that wasn't my own. There were no family photos, no mementos, nothing that said, "This is Dolores Mayfield's space." Just an empty, lifeless room, like I had been erased. That room felt like a stranger's house, and for the first time in my life, I realized how easily I could disappear. They didn't even leave me with my things. No pictures of us together, no books, no old quilts I'd stitched with love. I used to think of myself as strong, someone who had always fought through life. But there, in that sterile silence, I felt small, invisible, like I no longer mattered. I tried reaching Jason. I called, desperate to hear his voice, but the phone just rang, and then nothing. Voicemail. I tried again and again, but the silence just grew. I was being erased, and the truth hit me like a cold slap. I didn't matter anymore. Jason and Danielle had made their decision. I wasn't needed. I wasn't strong enough. But deep inside, I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't finished. They thought I would quietly fade away, but they were wrong. I would not be forgotten, not by them, not by anyone. I refused to let the loneliness swallow me whole. I wasn't going to let it take me down, not without a fight. As the hours passed and I sat there, trapped in that sterile room, a quiet resolve began to form within me. They thought I was just a frail, helpless old woman. They thought I was already fading away, that I would quietly slip into the background of their lives and never be seen again. But they didn't know me. They didn't know what I was made of. I asked the nurse for a pen and a notebook. It was a simple request, but in that moment it felt like the first step toward reclaiming my life. The nurse brought me a small spiral notebook and a ballpoint pen, handing them over without a word, as though she could see it in my eyes. She wasn't going to stop me. Sitting there on that stiff bed, I started to write. At first it felt like I was just writing down the ordinary things, dates, little facts, things that had once seemed trivial. But as I wrote, the weight of what had happened became clearer to me. I wrote down Jason's full name, Danielle's, the date they'd dropped me off here. I wrote down the name of the lawyer they had already contacted, as though I hadn't noticed their sneaky little plans. I wrote down the bank accounts I still had access to, accounts they thought I didn't know about, but I did. I listed the deeds to my house, the house they thought they could take from me, but I wasn't ready to give up on it just yet. Every stroke of the pen felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. Every number, every name, every detail was part of the plan I was beginning to form in my mind. This wasn't the end for me. I wasn't going to be swallowed up by this cold, empty room. I was going to make sure they realized exactly who they were dealing with. I thought back to all the years I'd spent raising Jason. I thought about the long hours of hard work, scrubbing floors until my knees cracked, my hands bleeding from the constant labor, just to make sure he had a roof over his head and food in his stomach. I never asked for much. I gave everything to him because he was all I had left after his father passed. Every sacrifice I made for him. I didn't care about the pain, the exhaustion, the bruises. As long as he had what he needed, I would keep giving. And then came breast cancer, a battle I fought alone. But I fought it like I'd fought everything in my life, with grit, with determination, with the belief that if I could just hang on, if I could just make it through, I would be okay. And I did. I made it through, just like I had made it through every hardship before it. But now, Jason had taken everything I had worked for. He had forgotten the sacrifices, the pain, the love I'd poured into him. But that wasn't the end of my story. Number. I wasn't weak. I wasn't dying. I was just underestimated. And that would be their biggest mistake. I wasn't finished, not by a long shot. I had more fight left in me than they could ever imagine. As I sat there, scribbling down the facts, the plan began to form in my mind, clearer and stronger with every word I wrote. They thought I was a burden. They thought they could lock me away and forget about me. But I had a lifetime of resilience within me. I wasn't about to let them steal that. The moment I made that call to Monica, my lawyer, I felt something shift inside me. It was a tiny movement at first, like a spark just beginning to catch. But I knew it was the start of something bigger. I had kept my silence for so long, letting them believe they could do whatever they wanted with me. But that day, when I picked up the phone, something in me broke free. Monica had been my lawyer for years, though I hadn't spoken to her in some time, but I never took her off my list of clients. I didn't know why at the time, but now I realized it was because I never stopped believing I might need her again. So when I dialed her number and heard her voice on the other end, I felt a strange sense of relief wash over me. It was like the world wasn't closing in around me anymore. I had a plan. I wasn't alone. "Monica, it's Dolores Mayfield," I said, keeping my voice steady, but every word felt like a lifeline being thrown to me. "I think my son has committed fraud. He's taken control of my accounts, and I've been put in a nursing home against my will." She didn't even hesitate. There was a pause on the line, a long enough silence for me to catch my breath, and then she said, "Tell me everything, Dolores." And so I did. I told her about Jason's lies, about Danielle's coldness, about everything they had taken from me, my dignity, my home, my very sense of self. As I spoke, I could feel the weight lifting off my chest, like every word I said chipped away at the stone wall they had built around me. Monica listened carefully, but I could hear the fire in her voice as she responded, "We're going to fix this, Dolores. I'll help you. We're going to take them down." Monica promised she would take care of everything. We started working on a strategy, first freezing Jason's access to my bank accounts, and then filing motions against him to strip him of any legal control over me. It wasn't just about money or power. It was about sending a message. Jason thought he could take my life away, control my future, and erase me from existence. But I wasn't dead yet. A few days later, I left that nursing home. The day I walked out that door, I swear I could almost taste freedom in the air. It was a slow walk, but every step felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. The walls, the white tile floors, the coldness. It all faded away behind me as I took that first step into my future. I didn't look back. In the car on the way to my lawyer's office, I sat quietly, my hands folded in my lap. But my heart was beating faster than it had in months. I was free. I had my fight ahead of me, and I was ready for it. I had nothing left to lose, and everything to gain. It was time to take back what was mine. Jason thought he could just erase me, but what he didn't understand was that the woman he underestimated wasn't going anywhere. Not without a fight. With Monica by my side, we set everything in motion. It wasn't just about getting out of that place. It was about taking control again, showing them all that I wasn't some old, helpless woman waiting to be forgotten. No, they'd underestimated me, and I was going to make them regret it. The first thing we did was sell the house, my house, the one I had built with sweat and tears, the one I had worked for all my life. It had always been my pride. But Jason, he'd taken it over without asking, without even a second thought. He thought he could just walk in and take what was mine, like I was already dead. But I wasn't dead. I was still here, and I was going to make sure he knew it. Monica worked quickly, filing everything we needed to ensure the house was sold, and the people who bought it weren't some strangers who would just flip it or tear it down. No, this young couple, bright-eyed and full of dreams, they were going to treat it the way I always had. They were going to care for it, love it, just like I had intended all along. It wasn't just a house to them, it was a home. And in a way, that made me feel like I was handing it over to someone who would honor the love and effort I'd poured into it. I watched the paperwork get signed, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I could finally breathe. That house, my home, had slipped out of Jason's hands, and I felt a quiet satisfaction, like a weight was lifting from my chest. He thought it was his now, thought it was his by right, but I showed him that nothing was ever his without my permission. The money from the sale went straight into my account, and every penny was a reminder of who had fought for that house, who had worked until her knees bled to keep it. The next step was the legal papers. Monica had them ready, served to Jason with the same cold efficiency that he had used to turn my life upside down. I didn't know when he'd receive them, but I knew what would happen. I knew he'd be blindsided, just like I had been. And watching him squirm, watching him try to figure out what to do as his carefully laid plans fell apart, was the sweetest revenge. He thought he had control over me. He thought he could lock me away and steal everything I had worked for. But he was wrong. And then there was Danielle. She wasn't as calm as she pretended to be. Oh no, that woman, who had once whispered sweet words in my ear about how hard marriage was, now stood in the background, watching everything unravel. When she saw those papers, I could feel her anger from across the room. The facade she'd built, the one where she smiled and nodded like everything was fine, cracked. I saw the fear in her eyes, the one that told me she knew exactly what was coming. They thought they could get away with it, but now the truth was catching up to them. There was something deeply satisfying in that moment. Watching them both, Jason and Danielle, struggle. They had tried to erase me, to make me disappear, but I wasn't going anywhere. This was my moment, the one I had been waiting for. Their plans were falling apart, and for once, it wasn't me being left in the dust. As I sat back and watched everything unfold, I felt a calm I hadn't known in years. The battle wasn't over, but the first victory was mine, and there was nothing they could do to take that away from me. I didn't tell anyone, not even Monica, not at first. But the idea had been quietly growing in my mind since the day I walked out of that nursing home. They thought they could erase me. They thought they could tuck me away, out of sight, out of mind, like an old coat they no longer wanted. But they hadn't seen me, not really. I wasn't done yet. And I was going to make sure Jason saw that every single day. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon when Jason finally came to my door. He hadn't knocked before, not since I moved in next door. But that day, I heard the tap-tap of his knuckles against the wood, tentative and unsure, like a man who didn't know what he was about to face. I hadn't expected it, but I wasn't surprised either. It was as if he knew, deep down, that he couldn't just leave things hanging. So he came. And there he was, standing on my porch, with his hat in his hands, looking more like the boy I once knew than the man who had betrayed me. I didn't rush to answer. I wanted him to wait. To stand there for a moment, just long enough to let the weight of everything settle on his shoulders. He was trying to put himself together, to find the right words, but there were no right words. Not yet. When I opened the door, I didn't greet him with warmth, but I didn't slam it in his face either. I just stood there, steady, calm, and waited for him to speak. I could see the guilt in his eyes, the confusion in his posture. He wasn't sure what to say, but he started anyway. "Mama," he began, voice low. I'm sorry. I've been thinking about everything, about what I did. I thought I was doing what was best for you. I didn't flinch. I didn't invite him in. I just stood there, my hands folded at my waist, watching him. He kept talking, the words spilling out like he thought an apology would be enough to undo everything, like it would make up for all the hurt, the betrayal, the years I had spent giving him everything. "I didn't want to hurt you," he said, his voice cracking, "but you weren't taking care of yourself. I had to make a choice. I had to do what was best for you. I listened. I didn't interrupt. He was trying. But the more he spoke, the more the truth of it hit me. He wasn't truly sorry. He was sorry he got caught. Sorry his plan was falling apart. Sorry he couldn't control me anymore. But sorry for hurting me. Not truly. When he finally paused, I looked him in the eyes, steady, unwavering. And then I said the words I had been holding back, the ones that had been swirling in my mind for so long. "Jason," I said, my voice sharp but not angry. "You didn't take care of me. You got rid of me. You didn't love me enough to fight for me. You loved the idea of me, but when it became too hard, when I wasn't convenient anymore, you threw me away." His face fell. He didn't say anything, didn't try to explain anymore. He just stood there, stunned, like the weight of my words was finally sinking in. But I wasn't finished. "I'm at peace now," I told him. "I'm finally at peace. And you have no place in it unless you can show me the respect I deserve. You can't just walk back into my life with a few words, Jason. You've got to earn it. You're not entitled to me anymore. You never were." He stood there in silence, the words I'd said hanging between us like a wall neither of us could cross. He didn't argue, didn't try to convince me, and I could see it in his eyes. He finally understood. This wasn't about forgiveness, it was about respect, and I wasn't giving him mine until he proved he could give me his. I closed the door gently but firmly, watching him through the window as he stood there, still trying to process what had just happened. I didn't feel the need to say anything more. I didn't need to explain myself again. I had said what I needed to say. I was done trying to make him understand. This was my moment, my peace, and I wasn't going to let anyone take it from me again. It started slow, just like everything good in life. Tyler, my grandson, began visiting me more and more. At first, it was just a little here and there. He'd come over after school, sit with me on the porch while I sipped my sweet tea, and we'd talk. But soon, those visits stretched into longer hours. He'd come in the mornings, stay until the evening, and help me with the garden. That's where we started, planting marigolds and tomatoes. It wasn't about the plants, though. It was about the time, the care, the love. Tyler had always been a quiet kid, but now, with Jason and Danielle out of the picture, he seemed more open. He seemed freer, and I could tell he wasn't just helping me with the flowers, he was helping me heal. It wasn't lost on me, the way he paid attention to everything I said. He listened when I spoke of the past, about the sacrifices I'd made, the things I'd given up, and the dreams I had for him. One afternoon, as we were working together in the garden, he looked up from where he was digging, his small hands covered in dirt, and said, "Grandma, I'm sorry for what my parents did, for everything they took from you." At first, it took me by surprise. I had never asked him to apologize for their actions. But there it was, his tender heart reaching out in a way Jason never had. He was only a boy, but his words carried the weight of an adult's understanding. I wiped my hands on my apron and looked at him. There was no need for him to carry that burden. "Tyler," I said softly, my voice steady but warm, "you don't have to apologize for them. They made their choices. But you, my dear, you're different. You're learning what real love is. You don't need to carry the weight of their mistakes. You just need to be you." And that was the truth. I never blamed him for his parents' actions. He was innocent. And as he spent more time with me, I could see how much he was learning about love. Not the shallow, selfish kind that Jason had shown me, but the real kind. The kind rooted in respect, in care, in sacrifice for one another. I wasn't just teaching him how to grow a garden, I was teaching him how to build a life that mattered, one step at a time. I could see the change in him, too. His eyes no longer carried the weight of the lies he had heard at home. He was starting to smile more, laugh more, and his hands seemed lighter, not just in the soil but in life. He was learning how to give love without expecting anything in return. How to help without resentment, how to be present. There were days when he would sit with me on the porch and we wouldn't say much. We didn't need to. We just sat there, enjoying each other's company. Sometimes he would ask about my childhood, or about his grandfather, or about the house. And I'd share those stories with him, knowing that one day they'd be his to tell. That was when I realized something that filled me with more peace than I could have imagined. Tyler was going to be the legacy I left behind. Not Jason, not Danielle. They had made their choices, and now they were the ones living with the consequences. But Tyler, he was learning to love without strings, without manipulation. He was learning to love for love's sake, not because it was convenient. I began to see a future again. A future where I wasn't just a mother or a grandmother who was cast aside. A future where the love I had poured into Tyler would flourish. Not just in the soil of our garden, but in the way he lived his life. He wasn't just helping me with the garden, he was helping me grow something far more important, the future. And with him by my side, I knew the seeds I planted would never die. They would live on in him, in the way he loved, the way he respected, and the way he chose to build his life. I'd been silent for long enough. The time had come for me to make it clear, once and for all, who had the power here. I wasn't going to let Jason think he could take everything from me and walk away without consequences. He'd betrayed me. He'd thought I was weak, thought he could push me aside like an old coat he no longer wanted. But he didn't know me. He didn't know the woman he was dealing with. I had lived a life of strength, of sacrifice, of deep love, and I would be damned if he erased that. So I updated my will. I had every right to make sure my legacy was what I wanted it to be. And Jason, he was getting nothing, Absolutely nothing. I wasn't leaving him a dime, not a penny, not after what he'd done. I had given him everything, and in return, he thought I was a burden. He thought he could toss me aside, along with everything I'd worked for, without a second thought. But I wasn't just cutting him out. I had bigger plans. I needed to make sure the world knew I hadn't been forgotten, and that women like me, strong, older women who had been cast aside, wouldn't be erased either. So I set up a fund for older women in crisis, women like me, who had been discarded by the very people they raised. I wanted them to know that there was someone out there who saw them, who understood them, who believed they still had value. The fund would go to a community centre that helped these women, provided housing, resources, and the support they needed to rebuild their lives. I made my first donation, $50,000. That wasn't just money to me, that was my voice. That was my final statement to Jason. That was me telling the world, you don't get to decide when I'm done. You don't get to control my legacy. The community centre accepted the donation, and I could feel something shift inside me. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was doing something that mattered. It wasn't just about getting revenge. It was about showing up for the women who had been silenced, who had been left behind. I was going to be the voice they never had, the strength they'd been robbed of. My donation wasn't just about the money. It was about dignity. It was about standing tall and saying, I am still here, and I am still powerful. But Jason? He was about to find out exactly what it felt like to be erased. A few weeks later, I got the call. Of course I did. He had been avoiding me, thinking he could run from the truth. But now, with the will finalized and the money donated, he was desperate. He wanted answers. He wanted to know why he wasn't included. Why wasn't he getting anything? He tried calling, texting, doing everything he could to get in touch. But I wasn't having it. I wasn't going to make it easy for him. He had no right to walk back into my life, no right to come crawling to me after everything he had done. I picked up the phone once, just once, when I saw his name flash across the screen. His voice was hesitant, almost childlike as he said, "Mum, is this real?" The will. Why didn't you leave me anything? I didn't say anything right away. I let the silence stretch between us, let him feel the weight of what he had done, and then, with a sharpness I hadn't used before, I said, "You erased me, Jason. You took everything I had and threw me away like I was nothing. Now you're learning what that feels like." There was nothing left to say. He was silent on the other end of the line, and I could hear it in his breath. The shock, the guilt, the realization that he had gone too far. But it was too late. The damage was done, and now it was his turn to live with the consequences. I never responded to him again. No calls, no texts, no apologies. I wouldn't let him back in. He didn't deserve to be part of my life anymore, and he had no place in my future. Jason was left with his shame, and I was left with my peace. I didn't need to fix him. I didn't need him to apologize. What I needed, what I had earned, was the freedom to live my life on my own terms. And that's exactly what I was going to do. It happened quietly, as things tend to when they finally reach their end. Jason left the neighborhood, no big fanfare, no dramatic confrontation, just gone. The house next door sat silent, the curtains drawn tighter than ever, as if it had been abandoned long before he even left. Danielle. She'd already disappeared, fleeing to Texas or wherever she thought she could hide from what she'd done. And there Jason was, standing alone in the wreckage he had built, too proud to admit he was wrong, but too defeated to stay. He made one last attempt to reach out to me. Of course he did. He couldn't leave without one final plea. One last attempt to pull me back into his life, to make everything go back to how it had been. But I wasn't going to answer him. I had nothing left to say to him, nothing that would change the truth of what he had done. I could see it in his eyes, though. When I finally walked out onto my porch that day, he knew. He knew exactly what he had lost, and the silence between us spoke volumes. His guilt, his regret, it was all there. But it didn't matter anymore. The damage had been done. I watched him go without a word. He never looked back. And that was enough for me. The peace that came after was strange at first. I had spent so many years trying to make everything work, trying to keep my family together, trying to fight for the people I loved. But when it all unraveled, when Jason walked away and Danielle was nowhere to be found, I realized something. This wasn't the end of my story. No, this was just the beginning of something new, something I could control, something that wasn't defined by betrayal or abandonment. Tyler stayed with me. More and more he came over, helping me in the garden, sitting with me on the porch, talking about life, about his dreams, and about the things we never had the chance to talk about when his parents were around. He was learning about love, the kind of love that doesn't ask for anything in return, the kind that's built on respect, on care, on sacrifice. As time passed, I realized how much Tyler was growing, how much I was growing. There were still moments of sadness, moments when the past tried to creep in, but I didn't let it stay. I had my future now, and that future, it was filled with Tyler. It was filled with roses, with sweet tea, with quiet afternoons. It was filled with dignity, my dignity. I wasn't just sitting idly by. No, I had a voice again. I had power again, and I was going to use it. That's when the invitation came. The community centre had been following my journey, and they wanted me to speak at their annual Elder Justice Seminar. They wanted me to stand before a room full of women who had been through what I'd been through, women who had been tossed aside, forgotten, or abused by the very people they had loved. I stood there that day, facing the crowd. I didn't tremble. I didn't flinch. I had nothing to hide anymore, nothing to fear. The microphone was in my hand, but my voice was steady, strong, unwavering. "Ladies," I began, "there is power in silence. And there is power in the law, if you're brave enough to use it." The room fell silent for a moment as my words settled in. The world may try to tell us we are weak. It may tell us that because we're older, because we're women, because we've given everything, we no longer matter. But I'm here to tell you that's a lie. I have fought for my dignity, and I will continue to fight. For myself, for all of us. The applause came, soft at first, then growing louder. It wasn't for me, it was for us, for the women whose voices had been stolen, for the women who hadn't had the strength to speak up yet. I was just the one who had found the courage to stand in front of them and say, "You're not alone." That night, as I sat on my porch, the roses blooming at my feet, I thought about everything I had been through. The pain, the betrayal, the loneliness, but also the love, the strength, the resilience. I wasn't just fighting for revenge, I was fighting for something far more important, a legacy of dignity. Not just for myself, but for all the women who had been forgotten, thrown away, made to feel like they were invisible. And as the stars lit up the sky and Tyler sat beside me, I knew this was only the beginning. I was still here, still standing, still fighting, and nothing, not Jason, not Danielle, not the world, could take that from me.